Elon's approach to dealing with the world's problems was three-pronged. As early as college back in the 1990s, he vowed to create companies that would deal with the internet, renewable energy, and space. In this episode, we'll start by talking about energy itself. We'll get to the renewable part of the equation later.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Tesla is the Musk company that is focused on renewable energy, and I would argue, energy, period. Since energy is so fundamental to everything that humans do and to life itself, it's fitting that we first start with our own first principles approach to understanding energy in relationship to human progress. If you look at the history of human civilization, you could make the case that the single thing holding back its progress the most was not knowing how to harness energy effectively. For thousands of years, human existence was basically about living from one meal to the next. In energy terms, this meant that people spent energy either to hunt food or raise food, which provided them with calories or energy so that they could do it all over again. Early societies were able to obtain enough to keep themselves and their families alive, but generally, that was all. And because this was how most people spent the majority of their time, they didn't have leisure time to do other things. Overall, this was both inefficient production and expenditure of energy. Or if you were smart or strong, you found ways to make others work for you. That is, you found ways to harness more energy. But it was still a very inefficient system. The advent of certain technologies, especially starting in the early 19th century, changed things dramatically. For instance, the invention of the steel plow alone permitted farmers to spend their energy much more efficiently. In addition to being more likely to break, a wooden plow had a relatively blunt, soft blade, and therefore couldn't apply as much force to a concentrated point, whereas the steel plow, with its sharp, rigid point, allowed the kinetic energy of the animal pulling the plow to be transferred more efficiently to the task at hand. There was less wasted energy. The result was that farmers could suddenly plant more crops, raise more food, and thus have energy in surplus. Other inventions, especially machines that could tap the chemical energy in the fossil fuels, made it possible for even more food to be grown and transported. And this freed up a lot of time. Large numbers of people could use their personal energies on non-food production activities. All of these developments spurred population explosions, enabled the growth of large cities, and made possible the rapid expansion of complex societies to an extent never before seen in history. This very short and simple introduction to energy now brings us to the modern era. Even though we know how to use energy-rich fossil fuels like coal, natural gas, and, most of all, petroleum, we generally still don't use them very efficiently. Much of the energy is lost in the form of heat instead of being used productively in the form of work. Using fossil fuels also generates a lot of pollution and likely contributes to climate change. And then there's another even larger problem. We only have a finite amount of fossil fuels on the planet. As societies grow, so do our energy needs, and eventually we'll run out of fossil fuels. This is just common sense. Now, it's not like people haven't known the limitations of fossil fuels for a long time, and that, therefore, renewables should be the way to go. We've long known that renewable energy is plentiful and virtually limitless. Solar energy, or energy from the sun, for instance, is by far the most abundant source of renewable energy, and it literally falls out of the sky. Every hour, the sun radiates more energy onto the earth than the entire human population uses in 1 year. There is some dispute as to whether this figure is accurate, but what is not in dispute is that the sun provides more than enough solar energy for all our energy needs. But for a long time, the major impediment to wide adoption of renewable energy has been economics, It's just been a lot cheaper to use fossil fuels. It's ironic, really. In a world that is so hungry for energy, there's actually far more than we could ever use, but we just haven't known how to harness it properly. But recent technological progress has made solar panel technology much cheaper. Battery technology has also made great strides, improving both cost and performance. Enter Tesla, the renewable energy company, which has taken advantage of both these trends in its mission to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. When Elon was thinking of his grand strategy and decided that renewable energy was one of the main pillars, it's likely that preserving the environment was one of his big goals. After all, it's a no-brainer that fossil fuels create a lot of pollution as a byproduct of being burned in the process of converting their chemical energy ultimately to electrical energy. But to be more specific, when we say fossil fuels hurt the environment, what we really mean is that they create a health hazard. Again, this is no surprise, and you could say that people have just accepted the trade-offs of using fossil fuels because overall they provide so many benefits. But let's take a quick look at the negative effects of fossil fuels. Burning them creates climate change and releases pollutants that lead to early death, heart attacks, respiratory disorders, stroke, asthma, and absenteeism at school and work. It has also been linked to autism spectrum disorder and Alzheimer's disease. Research from Harvard University, in collaboration with the University of Birmingham, the University of Leicester, and University College London, found that more than 8 million people died in 2018 from fossil fuel pollution, significantly higher than previous research suggested, meaning that air pollution from burning fossil fuels like coal and diesel was responsible for about 1 in 5 deaths worldwide. Those are just some quick recent figures to provide context. It doesn't even touch upon all the people throughout the last 150 years who have died or been injured from fossil fuel-related pollution. And it was probably much worse in years past because they did not have the benefit of emissions standards and other regulatory controls. Nor does the above-mentioned list include the dangers of extracting fossil fuels, such as black lung, mining accidents, drilling accidents, or oil spills in sensitive ecological habitats. All told, the price we pay to use fossil fuels is actually rather high, including in terms of the human cost, though many of us may never see these effects because most people watching videos like this live relatively far from where the pollution is worst. I don't hear him complain very much about fossil fuel pollution's negative health impacts, but he certainly does recognize it.
All fossil fuel burning vehicles fundamentally are subsidized by the environmental cost to Earth. But nobody's paying for it. We are going to pay for it, obviously. In the future, we will pay for it.
Like when you burn fossil fuels, there's all these like side reactions and toxic gases of various kinds, and like sort of little particulates that are bad for your lungs.
But here is another thing to consider. Thus far, every industrialized nation has had to go through the same process of using fossil fuels to grow their economies. The West did it first and went through the heavy pollution phases already. Then they exported a lot of their dirty factories abroad to emerging countries. Those countries are now going through the same process. China is the most recent example of a nation that has rapidly transitioned from an agricultural nation to an industrial power. As it did so, it burned through a lot of fossil fuels and wreaked a lot of environmental havoc along the way. Power plants, surging numbers of cars on the road, more heavy diesel trucks. They all need fossil fuels, and China's environment and population suffered as a result. For instance, Beijing's air quality was so bad that in 2008, when they hosted the Summer Olympics, the government ordered half of the cars not to drive every other day. The truth is that every emerging nation wants to industrialize also in order to raise their GDP, improve living standards, and become an advanced economy. And China just gave everyone a clear example of how fast it can be done. In a fossil fuel world, that means that each of these countries will have to go through the same process. That's a lot of sickness, death, and environmental degradation. The rich post-industrial nations want to impose clean air regulations on the rest of the world. But who are we to tell another sovereign country that they can't benefit from polluting when we've already done exactly that? First principles thinking says that we don't know how to use fossil fuels without the high human cost. Therefore, we should figure out how to stop. I personally think this is one of the reasons why Elon is so focused on renewable energy. Nation after nation is going through the same painful process, and he wants to break the cycle.